Welcome to Create Crucial Insight. I'm Blaine Gates. Today is day 37, 37 days of bliss. We continue to talk about state assumptions. What does it mean to state? It means to talk about, to discuss, to find instances of something. And what is it that we're looking for instances of? We're talking about assumptions. And what does assumptions mean? Assumptions are the things that we use in order to develop scenarios. If you think back to the state progress checklist, specifically the area which is connected to form agendas. All right, so if you have the first badge, the Endeavor Elements badge, then you know that the middle Endeavor element is form agendas. If you also have the state progress badge, then you know that the form agendas area connects to make assumptions, build scenarios, and choose plans. So before you can choose your plans, you have to build some scenarios. And before you can build some scenarios, you have to make some assumptions. Now, making assumptions, now we then attach that to the state assumptions checklist. All right, so we go from form agendas to make assumptions to boom. Now, what does it mean to make assumptions? So we talked about metadata. We talked about identifying specific types of data that we want, keywords, what kind of data is it, how is it presented, who is creating it, what is this thing that we're after. And then as we start to chomp down on like specific times in history and specific places where this data is created and specific ways that this data is presented, we get this thing called information. All right. Now we start to like put our information together and we're like, I'm starting to develop this knowledge. I'm starting to understand this idea that I'm trying to figure out, this place where I'm trying to create some assumptions. And why are we creating assumptions? Because we want to create some scenarios. All right, so then in the last 2 days, we talked about, all right, so once you have this information, you've pulled out your information from the metadata types, then you have to start figuring out like, is this good quality data? Is it correct? And is it relevant? Can I trust this data? Is this really what we need? Does it pinpoint exactly the relevant factor that we're trying to understand and that we need to be able to understand in order to make those decisions? All right, so then there's this thing where it's like the magic of the universe, the magic of the universe. So it's this space between like, here's the information and here's the insight. Now, why do we talk about this concept of making assumptions? All right, so at the end of the day, you have to use your knowledge to develop this insight. Now, all right, so have you ever heard of that thing where people are like, all right, so if like how many times if you are trying to deliver like a letter into a mailbox and you cut the distance in half, and then you cut the distance in half again, and then you cut the distance in half again, you continue to cut that distance in half for eternity, will you ever reach the mailbox? And the answer is no, because you can cut in half the numbers infinitely. You just keep adding more numbers on the end. And then the people say, well, although you can never reach the mailbox, you can get close enough to deliver the letter. All right. Now, if you're a religious person, then you've heard that that metaphor in a different context. But as for like making, building some scenarios and choosing some plans in order to make some decisions, it's also relevant. All right, so it means that there is going to be some space between the information that you have and the insight which you derive from this information and your ability to know exactly what will happen. All right, so we never know exactly what will happen. And even these days where people are talking about programmable cryptocurrencies, where let's say that the central government or some world government is able to create some type of digital coin, and then they can program it. So they give you this digital coin, and you can only spend it on certain things at certain times in certain places. And let's say that the government had complete control over the spending habits of all people, and we stop barter, we stop trade, we stop every other form of communicating. We have to use these coins. But even then, I mean, you have empirical data about the way people act, but then it's hard to know, well, how will people act when you have total control over them? How will they, how will their behavior change? What if their motivation changes? What if they get sick? What if they're like there's all these what ifs, all right? So then this probably makes you start to think about an actuary. So you get into an insurance company, you have a guy named Actuary, and it's his job to take all the numbers, crunch all the numbers, and start to guess probabilities. What types of futures are probable? So at the end of the day, we're talking about risk and reward, benefits and risk. All right, so you have to estimate the benefit and the risk of making decisions at specific times and under specific circumstances. So, first, you understand the circumstance. Then, you understand how the circumstance will change at different times. And then, you estimate the benefit and the risk of making decisions in those scenarios. All right, so what are some things that you can think about? So what are the key bases for developing insight? I mean, one way you can talk about insight, you could say, okay, insight, they are principles. All right, so like a lot of different organizations, they have developed through time, and they have created principles. They say that we follow these habits, these behaviors, these concepts, this information. We've developed some principles. Some people say knowledge. All right, so I've read all these books and I have all this knowledge. So, if you ask me to solve a problem, I can solve it because I have looked at enough similar scenarios or exact scenarios to be able to derive some type of pattern. And eventually, like I was saying, you're never going maybe, I mean, I wouldn't say never, but and not for all decisions, but it's unlikely that for every decision you'll always understand every relevant factor. You can understand a lot of them, or maybe even most of them, or maybe almost all of them. And that's why we use the word assumption, because there's always that little space. We have to assume insight. We have to bridge the gap where we don't know. We have to make some educated guesses. Like, so when you listen to economists talk, when you talk about investment managers talk, when you talk about stocks and bonds, when you talk about business, there's always varying understanding of facts because of that little thing we call assumption. And so the insight that people derive from possibly the exact same data, the exact same facts, will be slightly different because everyone has to bridge that little gap of the unknown with something that we call an assumption. But you need to do your best to make and implement decisions, which means that you have to be able to at least cover your bases for the basic amount of information which is necessary, required in order to make those decisions. You need to explicitly determine. All right, so you may have a discussion. All right, so what are the metrics we're looking at? What are the things we're trying to do? What are the principles that we're using? What is the direction that we're heading? We need to talk about these things. What are the results that we're trying to achieve? Explicitly determine. And then eventually there's still going to be that gap where you have to implicitly assume. You have to have that, and maybe that's where people talk about a gut feeling. You know, a couple of many videos ago, I was talking about people make decisions based on gut feeling. But then if you add a little more information, all of a sudden that gut feeling changes again and again as you continue to add more knowledge. And the thing is, eventually, if you continue to build and build and build on all of this information, if your gut feeling is becoming more and more attuned, like as you add more information, your gut feeling is like not moving as much, and then you add more and more and more information, and your gut feeling is like eventually it's just stuck. I mean, then the problem comes where, like, what is that word people are always talking about? Like, confirmation bias. So at some point, you're only looking at information which confirms your preconceived bias. So, anyways, you're gonna find out through time whether you were right or whether you were wrong. But do your best to create insight and build the assumptions which you need in order to create a variety of scenarios. And eventually, you'll be able to choose a plan. Now, just to complete the video, I know that you guys love this background, and I really like the light. I mean, right now it's crazy. You can see the snow. I should show you the snow. It's absolutely crazy out here. Can you see this? So, and the reason I'm showing you this is because this is the last day I'm going to be in this location. So I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for tuning into Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates.